It's truly a magnificent feat to have an ensemble of outstanding characters, each with intriguing characteristics and inner conflicts, to then completely destroy the vast majority of them by the end of the show. And David and Dan, the showrunners of Game of Thrones, somehow managed to do it. So for this video, we're going to be ranking the top 10 characters that David and Dan ruined the most, and it's not like there wasn't a lot to choose from. Number 10, Euron Greyjoy. Honestly, I really didn't know where to place Euron and if I should have even included him on this list to begin with. Because the thing about Show Euron is that he was bad from the get-go, while every other main character on this list was at one point an outstanding character who you love dearly. But Euron, on the other hand, definitely doesn't fit that description. His entrance was laced with juvenile satire, and he wasn't this menacing and terrifying figure he was supposed to be. Which is the main reason why I'm including him on this list, because his book counterpart is a drastic upgrade from the show version. I made an entire video about this, talking about the many issues of Euron Greyjoy and how to fix his character. The main points were his lack of impact in the story, his inconsistent goals and motivations, the weird cartoonish character direction, and how his constant usage of annoying comedy was a detriment. Show Euron is basically an entirely different character from his book counterparts, and just from that alone I think deserves him a spot on this list. He may not make you as upset from how bad of a character he is since he was never good, but the potential was extremely high for him to be great. Number 9, Jaime Lannister. This may seem like blasphemy that I'm putting Jaime so low on this ranking, but keep in mind, he was only ruined during his final episode. Up until that point, he genuinely had some good development, and I think his season 7 arc was the best thing about that season. So at least he doesn't have multiple seasons worth of development that makes him an atrocious character, and instead just one episode. Now, I used to really hate how Jaime said that he didn't care for the innocents, but this could also be interpreted as Jaime using his Kingslayer persona to come across as being more tough, and pushing himself down this hateful path that he's suddenly on. The bigger issue to me that still ties into this terrible line is that the writers are taking his character into a direction that regresses him and undoes his character growth. I think it would have been perfect to have a Mad King mirror in that Cersei was contemplating destroying the city and Jaime is forced to kill her. Thus, he sacrifices another thing he loves, which is his sister, losing his honor, skill, and love for what is right. Not him suddenly going back to her despite being appalled by her and dying while trying to flee on a honeymoon getaway. It makes the Brienne love scene feel like fan service because he abandons her within seconds after having sex. Surely he should know the fate of Cersei by this point. It fundamentally feels like a failure to the character's ending when you can read any other rendition of it and probably like it significantly more. He's supposed to have this addiction to Cersei, but that was the entire point of this season 7 arc, in that he overcame her toxic grasp and moved on to do good things. But whatever, I guess the writers disagree. Number 8, Daenerys Targaryen. Like Jaime Lannister, you'd probably assume that she should be further into this list, but she really wasn't that bad up until David and Dan decided to cram an entire Mad Queen arc in the span of like 2 episodes. Or really just 1 episode, because before this she was perfectly happy. An entire arc that should be at minimum an entire season long fundamentally doesn't work in just a single episode. You lose out on all the detail, slow and believable build-up, and it's as if David and Dan are forcing Dany's character to bend and break into something she's not. That's why you need to take time to slowly progress her to this mad state, instead of it literally happening overnight. She has shown signs of being ruthless and cold in the past, but her reasoning was always that these were bad people, and she cared about the common folk. I can go into a plethora of issues as to why the whole scenario of her snapping is so devoid of logic, but we already know the dense layer of dog shit writing that submerges her character here. It completely lacks common sense and utterly disconnects you from the character because you have no idea why she's destroying the entirety of King's Landing when she already won and should only care about Cersei. So when there's a glaringly obvious fix for the writing in having Rhaegal die during the Battle of King's Landing, thus driving Dany to go crazy and act irrationally in the moment, makes me think that David and Dan had no idea how to execute the Mad Queen arc. Because as it stands, there was nothing to drive her over the edge during that moment, and I don't know why she was showing so much restraint up until that point. Such a simple change could have fixed multiple major errors in the script, and it's just mind-boggling to me that they let this happen. Daenerys, because of this, has such a contrived ending, and when she inevitably dies, you barely feel anything from how compromised her character was. Number 7, Arya Stark. Now, Arya Stark as a character I think is pretty much intact, and her overall persona I think is fine within the later seasons of the show. The primary issue is that David and Dan had no idea how to utilize her within the story, because in season 7 her entire conflict was about questioning and challenging her sister, which was pretty wild and felt contrived throughout, and then in season 8 she basically had nothing to do. That's why I primarily believe that David and Dan gave her the Night King to kill as a consolation prize, because besides that, she doesn't use any of her faceless assassin skills, let alone using them to kill the Night King. It makes an entire 2-season chunk of her journey feel absolutely pointless because she practically has no payoff for what she went through. That's like watching Rocky train for an entire hour and then he decides to become a birdwatcher in the end. The fact that Jon or anyone don't bring up that she can simply assassinate Cersei with her unique skill set during any meetings is maddening. It sidelines her character and shifts the spotlight onto Jon and Dany as they hash out a jerry-rigged conflict that makes no sense. Arya's circumstances is so heartbreaking from how much of a fan favorite character she was and how underutilized she has been since the end of season 6. Number 6. Jon Snow. David and Dan handling this character is honestly really depressing because he becomes so dull and shallow through their writing. The second he's resurrected, it feels like he's just a tool to carry out the plot and all personality has left the character. Even the internal conflict of being a Targaryen is so half-baked because David and Dan barely explore it to a good extent. And the dialogue they write for him is terribly basic and repetitive, so much to the point that it's become a meme about how much he says "McQueen" and "I don't want it." But even just developing the character feels largely skipped over as key scenes like the reveal and him telling his sisters are extremely rushed, or just flat out not included. So since the most interesting aspect of his character is so neutered and downplayed, it in turn makes him very uninteresting, along with the character literally dying and being brought back to life. But David and Dan treat that as a get-out-of-jail-free card instead of a major act that fundamentally changes him. Forget about how Beric Dondarrion says that dying and coming back from the dead drastically changes you. There's so much under the surface for Jon Snow to be expanded upon that it's just sad that David and Dan don't go there and rush the story to the point of making him a generic good-doer with barely any depth. Number 5. Cersei Lannister. Speaking of characters that used to be really deep and complex, Cersei Lannister is basically a husk of what she used to be in the earlier seasons, primarily because David and Dan give her nothing to do in the final seasons. At the absolute bare minimum, she has Jaime in season 7, but once he leaves, season 8 King's Landing is like a barren wasteland for any developments or characters. We have Bronn, who's legally not allowed to have scenes with Cersei, Qyburn, who basically has no characterization, a brick wall, and a horny cartoon pirate. Pick your poison. The selection of people for Cersei to talk to is practically non-existent, and it's very apparent that David and Dan should expand upon King's Landing for the sake of Cersei's character instead of deflating it. Because by stripping King's Landing down to nothing, that in turn does the same for Cersei. She has no personal or minor conflicts to overcome, no one to express herself to, and thus nothing to change and develop her. Like, is she running the entire kingdom by herself? Does she have a new small council? Is she manipulating the masses into loving her despite killing thousands of them? She's the literal queen of King's Landing, which in turn breeds so much conflict, and it's completely unexplored. Cersei used to be a POV character back in season 5 and 6, and it seems like David and Dan stripped her of that title for the sake of rushing the show to its conclusion. Lena Headey deserved much better than staring out of windows for most of season 8. Number 4. Varys. When we're at the point where the actors playing the characters are clearly upset with their direction, then you know we're down bad. Varys was a mysterious and intelligent man who always operated in the shadows and had a major role in the biggest events of the show. He had great importance and was a lovable and unique character who had amazing and deeply engaging dialogue scenes, with an equally smart character. After season 4, Varys becomes a punching bag for Tyrion's barrage of annoying jokes and basically just becomes a background messenger. Looking through the entirety of seasons 5, 6, 7, and 8, the only scene that half resembles him is when he manipulates that random girl working for the Sons of the Harpy for information. Other than that, he does fuck all and may briefly chime in from some exposition here and there. Gone are his great discussions with Tyrion, the aura of mystery surrounding his character and what he's up to, and any impact he had on the plot. He spends the entirety of season 7 doing nothing and adds no value to Team Daenerys. Like, I understand he left behind his little birds in King's Landing, but if the man was able to order assassination attempts on Dany all the way in Essos, then surely he should know basic information like enemy troop movements. Then for his final outing, they have him suddenly switch his allegiance to Jon despite him being completely devoted to Dany for almost the entire show. Dany is rightfully upset that she lost her best friend and one of her children, and Varys is immediately like, "She might be a mad queen, everyone, abandon ship." So Varys acts dumb for the sake of scheming and is killed for it. What a waste. Varys is the epitome of being swept under the rug and being forgotten about, and is another unfortunate casualty of David and Dan not knowing what to do with a character. Number 3. Bran Stark. So for Bran, I can buy the fact that he's a dull husk of a human, but there are two major things that David and Dan destroy about him. Firstly, and most importantly, is the fantastical elements surrounding Bran. This is a character who has proven that he can manipulate the past and essentially travel in time, and is omniscient.
I can see things happening now, all over the world.
It's still a little confusing to me about how that aspect works, but he does imply at the end of the show that he can see into the future. So the fact that we have a character that is this busted in terms of strength and is never utilized is outrageous to me. The whole season 7 conflict with Sansa and Arya should be non-existent because of this, and so should many other conflicts as well. Along with literally introducing time travel and it never coming back up again. Bran should have had some major manipulation in terms of the outcome of the story, but from our perspective, he just waits on the sidelines to become king. For all we know, he did manipulate things in the background, but we'll never know for sure. It seems like that would be such a cool reveal that Bran is actually the most evil person in the show for allowing this catastrophe to happen. But then this leads into his other glaring issue in that his motivation is very inconsistent. He has said multiple times that he doesn't care about anything, and then seemingly he does care deeply about creating a prosperous realm at his role. His character just doesn't make any sense, and I haven't even gone into the fact that David and Dan skipped over an entire season worth of build-up for his character. Imagine being that lazy that you don't include a main character in an entire season of your show. Holy shit. Number 2. Littlefinger. Funnily enough, Littlefinger has an extremely similar fate as Varys does in terms of how David and Dan handled his character. What was once one of the smartest and most cunning characters in the show devolves into a glorified background character. His intelligent scheming becomes a confusing and convoluted mess, as he simultaneously plays all sides of the coin. He's doing baffling things like throwing away Sansa, turning around and making multiple alliances for the sake of scheming with no real sense of purpose. And then once all of this clearly wasn't up to par for the earlier seasons, David and Dan simply stopped trying to do anything with his character. Even when he comes back into the story in season 7, the writers give him such a batshit crazy objective of getting Sansa to kill Arya that it makes you fundamentally question if the character is okay mentally. Not to mention that it's massively contrived as to why Sansa is even trusting Littlefinger at this point. Littlefinger is like Daenerys in that the writers do something that utterly compromises the character, but for Littlefinger, that happens all the way back in season 5 when he betrays Sansa. From there, it's just never going to be believable about what he does because the writers don't understand one of his core principles. Then his death scene is such an insult to the character that it feels like David and Dan pissed all over his grave. It's just a depressing death scene because we witness a character who should be way more intelligent than this, be easily overcome in the most dumb scheme he ever devised. Him trying to manipulate Sansa would be like trying to manipulate Ned after betraying him if Joffrey never killed him. It flat out wouldn't work, and that's what David and Dan commit to for his character. So yeah, rest in peace, Littlefinger. I won't remember you for your dog shit ending, and instead your legendary Chaos is a Ladder monologue. Number 1. Tyrion Lannister. There seems to be a trend that my top 5 most ruined characters all happen to be the most intelligent ones. Maybe because David and Dan's intellect wasn't high enough to actually write them. But Tyrion to me was my absolute favorite character, and then he quickly becomes my most hated character. He takes the number 1 spot by such a huge margin that it genuinely makes me very angry. So opening up the can of worms that is Tyrion post-season 4 is basically an entire video in of itself. But essentially, every single characteristic about him utterly deteriorates. His humor turns into a juvenile and grating noise that makes my ears bleed. He sucked dry of any energy and charisma. And his intellect is a complete 180 to the point that he's now arguably one of the dumbest characters. Throughout the entirety of Season 7, Tyrion purely exists to just nerf Daenerys.
You'd be flying around the open seas alone for who knows how long.
I wouldn't be alone. I would have Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal. What can anyone do to them?
And have her not immediately win the war by going straight for King's Landing. Like, the more you think about it, the writers just use Tyrion as a tool to bend the story into the most dumb directions because he's deemed as being smart and people listen to him. The biggest example of this is his plan to capture the White, which ends up being completely pointless and a waste of time, and only exists to give the Night King a dragon. Along with him delivering the worst monologue in the entire show about how great stories make a king, which makes no sense because he literally knows what makes a strong and prosperous king. God damn, to go from the absolute peak of the show where he delivers the court monologue imbued with so much hate and passion, to this abysmal piece of shit, gives you mental whiplash. I really need to get around to making a Tyrion Lannister video because there's so much to unpack here. By the way, this video is voted on by my patrons, so if you want to support the channel and get some rewards, then my Patreon link is in the description. Thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments what your ranking would be.